Hi, everyone. Welcome to WOTS Weekly Features. Today's guest is Laurie Stewart, multi-genre writer of Corvid Moon Publishing. We'll be talking about mysteries, sci-fi, and why marginalized people need to be seen in leading roles. I'm Yelly Cruz, and I'll be your host. WOTS Toronto operates on land that is the territory of the Huron-Wendat and Paytune First Nations, the Seneca, and the Mississaugas of the New Credit First Nation. This territory is the subject of the Dish with One Spoon Wampum Belt Covenant, an agreement between the Haudenosaunee Confederacy and the Confederacy of the Anishinaabeg and Allied Nations to care for and share the resources around the Great Lakes in peace. We encourage you to educate yourself about the land you live on, wherever you're tuning in from. So today's guest is Laurie Stewart, who is a mobility-impaired LGBT+ cis woman whose pronouns are she, her. She writes about other disabled, LGBT+, mostly women. Her goal is to write stories that grab you, maybe make you think, but definitely entertain you. She writes mostly science fiction, fantasy, and steampunk. She is not one of those Book of the Month writers, as her disability won't let her write that long every day. But if you look around and hang around, you'll eventually find a book that you love, hopefully more than one. Thank you, Laurie, for being here with us today.
Well, thank you for having me. This is going to be fun.
It is going to be fun. I'm excited. So here, let's jump right in. First of all, can you tell us a little bit about your entrance into the indie publishing world? What kinds of things have led you there?
Well, it started with me getting a contract with a British publishing house for what is now my Mechanicsville series. And the editor was brutal. His editing involved things like screaming at me over the telephone that I was a fucking idiot. And how can you possibly write this kind of crap? And this is after signed contracts, so somebody liked it. And I ended up pulling out and writing his supervisor a really long letter. And then he was fired, and the entire series that they had bargained for was canceled.
Wow.
But since the first two books were already written, I self-published them. I figured they were good enough for British press. They're good enough for me. And I finished editing and everything, and off they went. And I sold several dozen of each. But it turned out that that was very realistic and gritty, and that's not my strength. My strength is far more imagination and first person, for one thing, getting really into their head. So I've just continued self-publishing. I found out that if you're published by a big house, you still have to do most of the promotion.
Yes.
And you still have to do most of the work, but you get 1/15 of the royalties that you get self-publishing.
That's so brave. That must have been so scary to make that leap into.
Oh, pushing the little red button to publish for the first time was terrifying.
Wow.
And then I refreshed the page every 2 minutes for about an hour. And when there were no sales at all in the first hour, I just threw my hands up and walked away.
But you did it on your own terms.
Yes, I did. I hire someone to do my covers, but I discuss what I want on the cover, and he sends me several drafts until I get it just right. And I have a sensitivity editor for the LGBT issues and any handicap issues that are not mine. So I'm very careful to try and get it right.
Good. Can you tell us a little bit more about those stories that you're working on? So you mentioned your Miss V series. Tell us a little bit about that.
Yes, the Miss V mystery series is a lot of fun, both to write and I've heard to read. It's about a 60-year-old trans woman who is living in Smiths Falls, Ontario, which is a small town with small town attitudes. And she, in my tagline, I say she's sassy, classy, and a little smart-assy. And she has a habit of tripping over bodies.
Oh my gosh.
And the small town, narrow-minded cop keeps trying to arrest her for it, even when it is absolutely clear she had nothing to do with it. She just weirds him out. But she is definitely the hero. and her best friends are a gay couple and a lesbian couple. And they travel together, and of course she trips over a body. And I don't know what else to say. She's based on a dear friend of mine for about 20. I've known her for about 25 years, and about 5 years ago she transitioned to a woman. And she's smart and she's wise and she's got this sarcastic sense of humor. And I asked her if I can write about her. Can I make you a character? I'll exaggerate some things, but I will make it about you. And she was thrilled.
Oh, good.
Thankfully, because as soon as I started thinking about that, this whole series of what could happen popped into my mind, and I would have hated to waste them all.
I absolutely love that tagline about Miss B being classy, sassy, and a little bit smart-assy. I think it's just so good. So your friend must be a lot of fun to have around.
Yes, she is. I've inspired her to start writing too, although she's writing period romances, so it's not like we're writing the same character at all.
Awesome. So in your bio, and you've mentioned a little bit that you are mobility impaired and you're LGBT plus. Can you tell us a little bit about how those different parts of your identity inform your writing?
Sure. I've always known I wasn't quite normal. And I was 40 when I got married. So we've been married 20 years, and it took me that long to find someone who could accept all the bits, including what I thought were broken bits. But earlier this year, my husband looked at me and he said, "You know what? You're asexual." I'm more demi or gray because I can and do have sex. Well, not right now. Menopause is a pain in the arse. But I'm only interested in the very specific people. Like him and Tom Hiddleston. That's like it.
Okay.
And maybe Gina Torres, the one who played Zoe on Firefly.
Yes.
And this informs my work because I was 60 when I found out I wasn't broken. I spent 45 years of my adult life thinking there was something wrong with me. And it turns out I'm not broken. I'm just not what I always thought I was and what I was always trying to be. And I think it is important to have people like me in lead roles in just books, not LGBT books, not coming of age or coming out stories, just books. Because I read voraciously, and I would have discovered what I was literally generations ago if they'd been in books. And so all of my books, even if the lead character is straight, have characters who are on the LGBT spectrum just because they surround me. My son is gay. I'd say about 80% of my friends are somewhere on the spectrum. I was at a book festival once, and someone asked me, how many of the trans people in this room do I know? Because they were all waving at me.
Oh, gosh.
And I looked around, and it's like, all of them. I know all of them.
Amazing.
And they gave me a funny look, but they're people. They're interesting, they're funny, they're good to have coffee with, they're people. And why are they not in books as people, as opposed to a token or a point? You know, making a point with this person being gay. Or as that editor said on Twitter the other day, they have to be important to the plot. No, they don't. My friends are not important to a plot. My son is not important to a plot. Well, he is to me, but other than that. So I just put them in as people.
They're allowed to just be there.
Yeah.
Yes.
And I truly believe that is one of the most important things I can do.
Yes, that's why representation is so important on all fronts, and people being able to see themselves.
It really is. My biggest fan is a 73-year-old woman who just loves my Miss V books. And she said, like she said, she's not trans or gay or anything, but she so identifies with her because she's got a bum hip and she can't walk very far. And she's really sarcastic on the inside, but very polite on the outside. And I love that my biggest fan is 73 years old. That is so cool.
It's so cool. I love that. Let's see. What draws you specifically to the genres of sci-fi, fantasy, steampunk? Because so you've said that you write about a lot of things in your real life. Yeah. So how do you bridge those two things together?
Okay. Well, I write the Miss V series as Delilah Knight because it's a cozy mystery and people expect certain tropes and certain mood in cozy mysteries. Under my own name, Laurie Stewart, I write the sci-fi and fantasy and some steampunk because I like what ifs. Like right now I look around and I go, in a lot of Asian countries, masks are a normal thing to keep out the dust and the pollution. Well, it's starting to open up around here. We're down from gray to red. And I look at people out on the street and I'm starting to get the, oh my God, they're not wearing masks. Even though they're outside. And I'm thinking, will masks become a normal thing? And I say, if masks become a normal thing, what happens to mating rituals? Because you can't see their face.
Yes.
And what happens to communication? Because I read somewhere that something like 90% of our communication is more facial expressions and gestures than it is words, which is why people get into arguments on text all the time. So what happens to communication? And then I take this and I build a story around it.
Love that. So you ask a question and then it turns into a story.
Yeah. I usually start with a character first. I'm working on a science fiction cozy mystery right now. And each of my personalities is currently in the middle of a book. And my lead character is short and fat and absolutely brilliant. And this all started out with, what if everybody ends up getting locked down forever? Like really locked down, not all of the cheaters and people who are out having grad parties and things. And it started with, what happens if we all get locked down? And then that morphed into, a friend of mine actually worked at the Mars research station in the Utah desert for 3 months, which is where they simulate Mars. The domes, the airlocks, the spacesuits, everything. They're testing equipment for NASA on a simulated Mars out in the middle of the desert. And I thought, ooh, what if they ended up locked down there? They're supposed to go for 6 to 8 weeks each. What happens if they're locked down for months? And there was the idea, almost completely fully formed.
Wow. So interesting. I have also started to have that reaction to seeing people without masks. So it's funny that you mentioned that. I always have to do a bit of a double take and remind myself that things are changing again. It's very scary sometimes.
Yeah, well, Ontario has been, especially my area of Ontario, has been in what they call a gray zone for the past 4 months. Gray is one step above red.
Yes.
Like they named this red, and then things got worse, and I guess they had no more interesting colors, so they called it gray. And that part was terrifying. My husband and I haven't left the house except for emergencies in a year and a half now.
Wow.
He's at high, because of his heart condition, he's at high risk for fatal complications. So we're not taking any chances. And totally. I will admit, there are days I am so stir crazy. I just want to go out. I don't care if we stand in a parking lot somewhere. It's not the house.
Based on that, I guess, are there any stories or topics that you haven't explored yet that you would like to explore in the future?
I would like to explore more steampunk. I've published a couple of short stories in various anthologies. And it's an interesting mixture of real history and research and utter fantasy. And I'd like to explore more of that. I've started a book, which I ended up putting aside in favor of Miss V, called The Steampunk Dragon, where when Louis Riel was brought to Ottawa to talk with the Prime Minister back in 1868, 1869, this really happened. But I'm having the train that he traveled on attacked by a steampunk clockwork dragon.
Okay.
So that everything in the West ended up differently because Louis Riel was dead. And he never
Definitely
did make the
spurs things
treaties.
up.
Yeah. And
Yes.
I got myself down a rabbit hole with the research and pulled myself out by writing something else for a while.
So I'm curious as to why publish things under a persona? Why not publish everything under Laurie Stewart? What led you to make that choice?
That was basically genre tropes. Cozy mysteries are expected to be clean. That's no sex, no murder, no swearing on screen. Right? She finds the body after he's been murdered. Or you might hear the screaming, but by the time you get there, it's over. There's no blood on screen. Whereas in my science fiction and fantasy, I may make up words sometimes for swearing, but they swear, and there is death on screen, and there is murder. And if you're a 73-year-old little old lady reading my clean, cozy mysteries, and then you end up with something like The Last Shot, which is it's fantasy, but it's much darker toned, and it's got swearing, and it's got her knifing a guy in the side because he annoyed her. You're going to fall off your rocking chair because it is so not what you expected.
So it's helpful for consistency, it sounds like.
Yeah, and to help shocking my readers, because I know that one of my favorite writers writes thrillers, and I loved them. But she wrote romance in her early career, like just straight romance. I loathe the old-fashioned romances, the Harlequins. Oh my God, I hate them. And I bought what I thought was a new book of hers because I'd never seen it, and it turned out to be a republishing of one of her old ones.
Interesting. Okay.
And I hated that.
Yes.
So I decided I'm not doing that to my readers. I am completely separating them.
That makes sense. Less surprise, less disappointment.
Less writing me letters about how come you swore all over the place in this.
I hope you're not getting any mean letters.
No, actually, all I've gotten so far is good ones.
Good.
I haven't angered anybody sufficiently to make them write a letter yet.
Good to hear. My last question is, are there any books or stories, and they can be yours or somebody else's maybe, that you would recommend to folks who are looking to dip their toes into science fiction and fantasy and all those genres that you are a master at?
Well, I wouldn't say master. I would start with the classics. What inspired me to write science fiction was Isaac Asimov and Ray Bradbury and Robert Heinlein, the old ones. They had a lot of character-first stories, but they also had what I would call real science fiction, where they would research the science behind things. So that now a lot of them are actually sort of feasible. A Dyson sphere is where you pulverize a couple of planets and you build a sphere around the sun that's metal about half a mile thick. Okay. And you build the world on the inside of the sphere. So you get infinitely more land and everything. And I think it was Larry Niven made that up. And it is now, well, not physically possible, but it's now conceivably possible. They have figured out how to do it.
Wow, very cool.
Of the modern writers, oh wow, there are so friggin' many. I mean, like I said, I'm a voracious reader. I can read a book in an afternoon.
Wow. Are there any maybe that are particularly good at including queer people and marginalized voices?
Anything by Renaissance Press.
Okay.
Their entire core team is on the LGBT spectrum.
Amazing.
And I've pitched them a story, which they are willing to look at, but I'm so busy with my own stuff that I haven't had time to do more than outline it. I think they insist that people be marginalized in order to be included. Like, you can't just write normal. There's my 45 years of trying to assimilate showing up. That you try to write common characters. And I really admire them for that. And there's trying to think of some of them. Bold Strokes books leaps to mind, but I think they publish romance and sexy time things, which as an ace does not interest me.
Totally. So fair.
Except Tom Hiddleston, and he would have to be in costume as Loki.
Yes, and Gina
that's non-negotiable. Non-negotiable. I have noticed that a lot of the smaller regular presses are starting to do more work with marginalized people, and I think that's fabulous.
So good to see, yes.
Yeah, I don't want to have to try to Google LGBT or try Googling Ace. You get more of those scam poker games than you can count.
Oh my gosh, I bet. It looks like Renaissance Press also has the Nothing Without Us anthology, which is full of stories.
Yes, I have a story in that, and it was Aurora nominated. The Auroras are the Canadian equivalent of the Hugos. They're the biggest science fiction fantasy award for writing in Canada.
Congratulations.
Thank you. And I got a little button that says, Aurora nominated. In that, my hero is a 80-year-old woman, again with a bad hip, because I have a crushed vertebra on the small of my back from a failed fusion. And it sits on my sciatic nerve, so that it's always a bad hip or a bad leg. So it's not always in my books, but it always is with me. So this little old lady, with her bum hip, tries to have an argument with a god.
Wow.
And, well, the god wins, but the god cheats too. So
that image is so powerful of this small old lady arguing with a god. I love that.
Yeah, it tried to turn into a novella, but I beat it back into shape.
Is there anything else that you'd like to chat about or mention that we haven't covered already?
I don't think so. That's, I feel like screaming, buy my books. I have mortgage to pay. But
amazing.
Every author says that.
As they should, as they must. Well, thank you so much for this amazing conversation.
Thank you so much for having me.
To keep up with Laurie's latest work, visit lauriestewart-author.com. And for more Corvid Moon's titles, check out corvidmoonpublishing.com. This has been today's WOTS Weekly Feature. Tune in tomorrow for a conversation about queerness and forgotten places with Sarah Dowling. For discounts and deals, check out toronto.thewordonthestreet.ca/weekly features. From all of us at WOTS, happy Pride Week.